In the darkest corners of the internet, there are rumors that spread like wildfire, impossible to verify yet impossible to ignore. Among them, one story stands out. A song, a melody passed from user to user, whispered about in hushed tones by those who dare to speak of it. They call it the deadly song. It starts innocently enough, a seemingly harmless track, playing on an unknown website, or perhaps in a forgotten corner of a streaming service. But there's a catch. A catch that no one who hears it can escape. The song has a simple melody, catchy even, but those who listen closely say they feel a creeping dread take hold. They claim that anyone who listens to the very last note will never be seen again. Vanished, disappeared without a trace. No warnings, no signs. Just a chilling absence where they once were. It's said that the song is cursed, and the first person to hear it is marked. It spreads like a virus from ear to ear, each listener unknowingly passing it on, until the curse has claimed its next victim. No one knows where it came from or who first composed it. Some say it was born from a tragedy. Others claim it is the work of something far darker, an entity that feeds off the souls of the unwary. But one thing is certain: no one who has listened to the song has ever escaped its grasp. You might be wondering why it hasn't been stopped. Why hasn't someone traced its origins, destroyed the file, and prevented more people from falling victim? The truth is, no one knows how to stop it. People try, but the song finds a way, always slipping through the cracks, always finding new ears. Even now, as you read this, you could be one click away from hearing the first note, one simple decision away from finding out whether the curse will claim you next. But what about you? Will you dare listen, knowing the danger? Or will you turn away, leaving the haunting tune for someone else to discover? Whatever choice you make, the deadly song is always waiting. Jenna had always been a curious person. It was a trait that led her down strange paths, uncovering oddities others would have ignored. So when she came across a thread in an obscure corner of the internet, she couldn't resist clicking. The title was simple: The Song You Should Never Listen To, and it caught her attention immediately. The thread was filled with comments, some offering vague warnings, others boasting about their experiences with the song, claiming that it had done nothing but lead to bizarre, unexplained occurrences. "I heard it, and nothing happened," one comment read. "But I know someone who disappeared after hearing the last note." Scary stuff. Jenna skimmed through the posts, her fingers scrolling faster and faster. Her interest was piqued. She wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially not one as intriguing as this. She found the link in the middle of the page, buried among the warnings and accounts of strange disappearances. There, in a tiny comment box, was a direct download link for the song. Her heartbeat quickened as her cursor hovered over the link. It was just a song, right? How could something as harmless as a song do anything? She clicked. The track began to play almost immediately, its soft, melancholic melody filling her headphones. It was hauntingly beautiful, but there was something wrong about it. Something that tugged at the back of her mind. The music was almost too perfect, too smooth, as if it were being woven from the very air around her. It had an unsettling quality, a subtle tug at her senses. Jenna closed her eyes, leaning back into her chair as the music washed over her. She hadn't heard anything like it before. The notes were like nothing she could describe, soft yet powerful, creating an atmosphere of growing unease. She began to tap her foot along with the rhythm, lost in the music, until a low hum began to rise under the melody. At first it was barely audible, but it grew louder with each passing second, like an electric current charging through the song. Jenna's body stiffened. It was subtle, but she could feel the air around her growing heavier, as if something was drawing nearer. She should have stopped. Her instincts screamed at her to close the tab, to pull the plug and forget everything she had just heard. But Jenna didn't. She kept listening. She had always been the type to chase the unknown, to push the boundaries just to see what happened next. The humming began to distort, warping with the melody. Jenna's eyes snapped open. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Something wasn't right. She reached for her mouse to pause the music. But before her hand could touch the mousepad, She heard it. The final note. It was unlike any note she had ever heard. The sound was piercing, raw, and jagged, like something ancient and malevolent cutting through her mind. The sound felt like it was digging into her skull, reverberating with a dreadful finality. Jenna gasped, her pulse racing. Her hand froze, hovering over the mouse. She stared at the screen, unable to move. The music had stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. It was too quiet, too still. Her heart thudded in her chest, pounding like a drum. A cold sensation spread from the back of her neck down her spine. The room around her seemed to darken, the shadows growing thicker, more oppressive. The walls felt closer, the air heavier. Then came the sound. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. A soft, distant whisper. Jenna's body tensed, her eyes darting around the room. "Jenna!" She whipped around in her chair, her eyes searching the empty space behind her. Nothing. Just her dark, quiet room. "Jenna!" The whisper came again, this time louder, clearer. She spun back toward the screen, her heart hammered in her chest. There was no one else in the room, but the voice was unmistakable. It was as though the very air around her had come alive, speaking her name. The lights flickered once, then twice. The monitor before her blinked, its screen suddenly glitching, distorting. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. She scrambled to close the tab, to shut everything off, but her hand wouldn't obey. And then, everything went dark. Jenna's eyes snapped open. The room was still dark, the glow of her computer monitor now just a faint, eerie light in the distance. She wasn't sure when she had fallen asleep, but something felt off. Her body was cold, and her skin tingled with an electric, uncomfortable sensation. She sat up quickly, her heart racing. The voice was gone, but the feeling of it lingered, hanging in the air like a lingering echo. She looked around her room. Everything was in its place, nothing out of the ordinary. Her bed was undisturbed. The whispers had stopped. Had it all been a dream? Jenna shook her head, trying to rid herself of the unease that settled deep within her chest. She glanced at the clock on her desk. 3:07 a.m. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, its screen lighting up with a message from her best friend, Lila. Lila. "Hey, did you hear that song everyone's talking about? You should check it out. They say it's kind of creepy." Jenna felt a chill crawl down her spine as her fingers hovered over the screen. She had just heard that song, the one everyone was talking about. She stared at the message, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to dismiss it, telling herself it was just coincidence, but the truth gnawed at her. She had heard the song. The voice had called her name. The thought of hearing the song again made her stomach turn, but something inside her, something insistent, pushed her to do it. She didn't know why, but the compulsion to find out more was overwhelming. She grabbed her phone and opened a new tab. Her hands were trembling as she typed the song's name into the search bar. The first result was the same as before, the same site, the same download link. She clicked on it without hesitation, though her pulse raced in her ears. The song began playing almost immediately, the soft melody creeping back into her ears. But this time, it was different. There was no distortion, no glitching sound. It was as if the song had been perfectly restored, as if the final note she had heard earlier had never been played. The rhythm was smooth, eerie, but hypnotic, her eyes fixed on the screen as the melody unfolded. And then it came. The last note. It wasn't the same as before. This time, it didn't feel like it was drilling into her skull, but the power behind it was undeniable. The voice, the whispering returned. "Jenna." She froze, her hand hovering over the phone, her heart racing. She swallowed hard. The voice was softer this time, calmer, almost coaxing her. "Jenna, you can't escape. It's already too late. It's already too late." Her breath caught in her throat. She slammed the phone down on the table, the device clattering loudly against the wood. The voice still echoed in her mind, louder and clearer than before. Its unnatural presence now ingrained in her consciousness. She stood up quickly, pacing back and forth in her room, trying to shake the feeling that was quickly consuming her. The whispers grew louder, swirling in her head, like an invisible force had taken hold of her. Then there was a sudden knock at the door. Jenna stopped dead in her tracks. The knock was loud and deliberate, breaking the silence in the room. She moved cautiously toward the door, her hand hovering above the handle, unsure of what to do. Another knock, louder. "Who is it?" Jenna called, her voice shaky, barely a whisper. No response. The silence that followed was almost worse than the knock itself. She reached for the doorknob, turning it slowly. Her heart raced, her breath shallow. When she opened the door, there was no one there. Confused, she stepped outside, peering down the hallway. Empty. The apartment complex was still and quiet, as if nothing had happened. But the silence was oppressive, like something was waiting to pounce. Jenna looked down at the ground, and that's when she saw it. A small, folded piece of paper resting against the door. She bent down and picked it up, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The message inside was brief, written in neat, precise handwriting. "You've listened. You're marked." The paper slipped from Jenna's fingers and fluttered to the floor as she stumbled back into her room. Her mind was reeling, every thought clouded by fear and confusion. She wanted to scream, to call someone, but a suffocating dread stopped her. The whispering was louder now, so close that it felt as though someone was right behind her. "You're marked, Jenna. There's no escape." The voice had become part of her, settling deep within her mind, like an unwelcome guest she could no longer rid herself of. She sank to the floor, her back against the wall, clutching her knees to her chest. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the relentless whispering, but it was no use. It was inside her head, always there, always with her. And then, her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message from Lila. It was something else, a video. Jenna hesitated before tapping it open. The screen flickered for a moment before the video started playing. It was a shaky, distorted recording of a person standing in a dark room. The person's face was obscured by shadows, but the voice was unmistakable. "Jenna, we told you. You are the last. You will vanish like all the others. You will never be found." The recording cut out abruptly, leaving Jenna in complete silence. Her eyes flicked to the clock. 4:00 a.m. The room felt colder, the darkness pressing in from all sides. The whispering, the voice, the recording. Everything felt too real, too overwhelming. Suddenly, her phone buzzed once more. This time, the message was from Lila. "Lila. Jenna, where are you? I've been calling you for hours. I saw the song. There's something really strange going on. People are saying it's cursed. They disappear after they hear the last note. Please call me back." But Jenna couldn't respond. She was frozen in place, her heart thundering in her chest. A sudden realization hit her. Lila hadn't seen the song yet. She was next. Jenna could hear a soft rustling behind her. Slowly, she turned around, her eyes wide in terror. Lila's face appeared at the window. Jenna's eyes locked onto Lila's face, her breath catching in her throat. Her friend's expression was strange, almost blank, as though she didn't recognize Jenna at all. The face that stared back at her was the same, yet somehow off. The shadows around Lila's form seemed to stretch unnaturally, like the night itself was closing in on her. Her hand pressed against the glass of the window, leaving a mark, a cold, dark smudge that spread as if something were trying to get inside. Jenna recoiled, backing away from the window. "Lila," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "What's happening? What's wrong?" But Lila didn't answer. Instead, she just stood there, her eyes vacant, as though she wasn't even aware of her own presence. "I warned you," the voice whispered again, now louder than ever. Jenna's world seemed to spiral as the last remnants of her sanity began to slip away. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a message. The screen was dark, blank. The only thing visible was the reflection of her own face, and behind her, The shadow of Lila loomed closer. Jenna's breath came in sharp gasps as she backed away from the window, her hands trembling uncontrollably. The shadows around Lila seemed to grow thicker, consuming her friend's form, as if the darkness itself were alive, feeding off her presence. Jenna could feel it too, the coldness creeping into her skin, the bone-deep chill that was spreading from the window to the very air around her. Her phone screen remained blank, reflecting nothing but her own terrified face, and behind her, Lila's form was growing closer, her features more distorted with every passing second. Jenna tried to scream, but the sound was caught in her throat, choked off by the suffocating weight of fear that pressed in from all sides. Lila's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a low, guttural hum emanated from her, vibrating the glass of the window and rattling Jenna's bones. The hum was familiar. Too familiar, and it made Jenna's stomach twist in horror. It was the same frequency, the same disturbing, unnatural pitch that had been in the song. Lila was no longer her friend. She was something else, something twisted by the very song Jenna had foolishly listened to. "Lila?" Jenna whispered, her voice barely audible. She reached for the window, her fingers brushing the cold glass as she tried to understand what was happening. But the figure outside didn't respond. Instead, Lila's eyes locked onto hers, unblinking, hollow. A sharp pain stabbed through Jenna's chest, as though something invisible was digging into her heart. She couldn't move. She was frozen, her body paralyzed by the gaze of the figure outside. It felt like the world itself was closing in on her, the walls of her room narrowing, until there was only the dark figure of Lila, her face slowly distorting, the skin peeling away to reveal something grotesque beneath. "Jenna." The voice wasn't Lila's. It was a deeper, more resonant sound, an eerie echo that seemed to come from all directions at once. The voice was not just speaking to her. It was speaking through her, filling her mind with a chilling knowledge that she had now become part of something far worse than she could comprehend. The whispers of the song began to flood her mind, the lyrics turning into a chant that echoed in the deepest parts of her consciousness. It was the song playing over and over, its rhythm becoming more insistent, its tone more dangerous. The voice of the song and the voice outside blended together until there was no difference. Both were parts of the same curse. The figure outside, Lila's face, contorted further. Her skin began to stretch, her eyes bulging out as if they were being pulled from their sockets. The last remnants of Lila were gone, replaced by something that wasn't human, something that was waiting for its next victim. "Jenna, you will join us. There is no escape. The song has already marked you," the voice hissed. Jenna's heart pounded painfully in her chest as she stumbled backward, her body finally responding. She turned away from the window and bolted for the door, her mind screaming at her to run, to escape the nightmare. But when her hand touched the doorknob, it didn't turn. She yanked it harder, but the door was locked. Panic surged through her, and her pulse raced. She couldn't stay here, trapped in this room with the thing that had once been her friend. She glanced back at the window, but Lila, if it could even be called that anymore, was gone. The shadows were all that remained. Her phone buzzed once more, but she didn't want to look. She couldn't. Yet, some force made her glance at the screen. A message. It was from Lila. "Lila, you can't escape, Jenna. You're marked, just like I was." Jenna's throat tightened, her vision blurring with tears as she stared at the message. Lila had been taken, and now she was next. The sound of her own breath seemed louder than anything else in the room, as Jenna frantically turned the lock on the door. Her hands were shaking so violently that it took several attempts to get the door open. She stumbled into the hallway, the walls around her pressing in, the air growing even colder. She had to get out. She had to run. But the moment she stepped into the hall, the lights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. The apartment complex felt empty, eerily empty, as though it had been abandoned long ago. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. Like invisible eyes were fixed on her every move. Jenna ran toward the stairwell, but something caught her eye. An old photograph taped to the wall near the elevator. She stopped, her feet frozen in place. The photograph was of a group of people, all smiling, gathered in front of the building. But there, in the middle of the photo, was a familiar face. Lila. Her eyes stared back at Jenna from the picture, but they were different, cold, hollow. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. How could this be? She looked closer, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Beneath the photo, there was a small note written in neat handwriting. The last note is always the one you never hear. A shiver ran down Jenna's spine. The song, it wasn't just a melody. It was a death sentence. And now, it was chasing her. She turned away from the photo and continued running. But her legs felt heavy, as if the floor itself was trying to hold her in place. She stumbled down the stairs, the faint sound of the song echoing in her mind. "You're marked, Jenna. You're one of us now." She stumbled out of the building and onto the street. The air outside was cold and still, the city eerily quiet. But when she looked around, the street felt wrong. The buildings seemed to be leaning in toward her, their windows like dark eyes watching her every move. Jenna's hands went to her head, pressing against her temples, as if she could block out the voices, the whispers, the song that was now part of her soul. She began to walk, slowly at first, then faster, as if something was chasing her, something just out of sight. And when she heard it, the last note, clear as day, ringing in her ears, she knew it was too late. Her surroundings began to blur, the lights flickering once more, and the ground beneath her seemed to shift, like the world was moving, shifting with every step she took. Jenna! The last thing she saw was the shadow of Lila, standing in the distance, a hollow, distorted smile on her face. And then everything went dark. When Jenna opened her eyes, she found herself in a place she didn't recognize. The streets were empty, bathed in the dull glow of a dying moon. The buildings around her were familiar but distorted, as if they were drawn from the edges of her memory, warped and twisted into something strange. Her heart raced. She couldn't breathe. The silence was deafening. There were no sounds of traffic, no hum of the city at night. It was as if the world had stopped turning, leaving her in a vacuum where time itself had ceased to exist. Jenna stood up, her body trembling, the cold seeping into her bones. She reached out for something, anything, grasping at the empty air, but there was nothing to hold on to. Her mind was clouded with the memories of the song, the whispers, the warnings, and the final note. She didn't know how long she had been out or what was happening to her, but she knew one thing: she wasn't alone. The shadows began to move, stretching unnaturally across the ground. Jenna's breath hitched in her throat as a figure stepped out of the darkness, a form she recognized, Lila. But it wasn't her friend anymore. The smile on Lila's face was twisted, distorted, her eyes hollow and lifeless. "Jenna." Lila's voice echoed through the air, but it wasn't her voice. It was deeper, more sinister, as though it was being channeled from somewhere else, something far darker. "You shouldn't have listened. You can never escape now." Jenna backed away, her eyes wide with terror. "No, I don't understand. What is this? What happened to you?" Lila stepped closer, the ground beneath her feet seeming to bend and ripple, like she was walking on something that didn't quite exist. "You heard the song, didn't you? You heard the last note." Jenna nodded slowly, her mind still racing, trying to process what was happening. But why? Why is this happening? Lila's smile widened, her face twisting into something grotesque, something that no longer resembled the friend Jenna once knew. "Shoi. Nyari, wanjidili, wa." The song doesn't just take you, it pulls you into its world, a place between worlds. And now, you are a part of it. We all are. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest. What happens now? What happens to me? Eli's laughter filled the air. A sound that was both terrifying and hollow, as though it came from a place where no human should be able to laugh. Now you wait. Like all the others, you'll disappear soon enough, just like the rest of us. The world around them seemed to warp and distort as the shadows closed in, pulling them both deeper into the void. Jenna tried to run, but her feet felt heavy, like she was walking through thick mud. The darkness swallowed her whole, and for the first time, she realized that no matter how far she ran, she could never escape the curse of the song. Jenna's vision blurred, and the world seemed to fold in on itself, the ground beneath her feet shifting and changing. She felt herself being pulled, dragged into a place where the air was thick and suffocating. The shadows around her seemed alive, reaching out with hands that were made of darkness itself. Her body was numb, her limbs unresponsive, as though she were floating through space. The whispers returned, louder now, drowning out all thought, all reasoning. You're one of us now. There is no escape. You will never leave. Jenna's mind raced, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She wanted to scream, to fight, but no sound escaped her lips. She was trapped, caught in the cycle, the endless loop that the song had created. The last note echoed in her ears, reverberating through her very soul. The voices of the lost children, the victims of the song, surrounded her, their faces flickering in and out of existence. They were all here, trapped in this place, just like her. As the darkness closed in, Jenna caught a glimpse of a figure, another victim, another person who had once heard the song. The figure was familiar, though her memory struggled to place it. The person was standing still, their eyes empty, their body motionless. The figure stepped forward, and Jenna's heart skipped a beat when she realized who it was. It was Lila again. But this time, she wasn't smiling. She wasn't distorted. She was just empty. Lila's mouth opened, and the same deep, eerie voice echoed out. You will never leave. You will never escape. Jenna's legs felt like jelly, her knees buckling beneath her. She collapsed to the floor, her body trembling as she tried to grasp some kind of control over herself. But it was no use. The song had claimed her, and now she was a part of it. The room around her began to spin, the walls shifting, folding into themselves. Jenna could feel herself slipping, losing her grip on reality, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were calling her name now, over and over. But then, in the midst of it all, she heard a sound, a faint, familiar tune. A song, playing in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. It was the song, the deadly song. Jenna knew what it meant. She knew what it meant for the next person to hear it, for the cycle to continue. She had become the next victim, the next one in the long line of souls trapped by the song. But even as she felt herself fading, something inside her refused to let go. She had to break free. She had to stop the song, stop the cycle, before it could claim anyone else. But was it too late? Was there a way out? The last thing she saw before everything went dark was the reflection of her own face in the mirror, hollow, empty, as though she had already disappeared. Jenna's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and terror. The world around her had dissolved into a darkness so complete that she couldn't tell where she ended and where the shadows began. She could still hear the faint echoes of the song, the melody that had trapped her, now a constant presence in her mind. But amid the chaos, a single thought clawed its way through the fog of her panic. There has to be a way out. She could feel herself fading, her body numb and weightless. The last remnants of the world she knew seemed to be slipping through her fingers like sand. But something, some force, some instinct, refused to let go. Jenna opened her eyes, though she wasn't sure if she was truly seeing. The darkness was still around her, but there was a light now, a faint glow. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her a sense of direction. She pulled herself forward, her legs trembling as she forced herself to move. Each step felt like an eternity, as though the very ground was pulling her down. The whispers, those insidious whispers, were all around her now, louder, closer. She could hear them clearer than before. "You cannot escape, Jenna. It is too late for you." But Jenna refused to listen. She had to break free. She had to fight. The song, the curse, it was all tied together, and she knew in her gut that if she could understand its origins, if she could uncover the truth behind it, she could stop it. But how? And where to begin? The light in the distance flickered again, growing brighter, revealing something beyond the darkness. An old building, half decayed, as though it had been abandoned for centuries. The song was louder here, as though it were coming from inside, calling her to enter. She didn't want to go in. She didn't want to hear any more of it. But something in her told her she had no choice. The building was the key, the place where everything began. With every step, the air grew colder, the whispers growing louder. Jenna's hands were cold, her pulse racing, but she forced herself to push through. The door to the building now right in front of her. She could feel the weight of history in the very air, as though this place had seen countless souls enter and never return. She reached for the door, and when her fingers brushed the handle, the whispers stopped. The door creaked open. It sounded like a death knell. She stepped inside. The room was large, empty, except for a single object in the center. It was a record player, the kind that looked like it belonged in another time. The needle on the record player was still, but there was something about it that felt ominous. Jenna walked toward it, her legs shaking, and when she reached the player, she saw something etched into the wood. A name. Samantha Bellows. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. She knew that name. Samantha Bellows had been the first to listen to the song, the first to disappear. It was the story that started it all, the urban legend that everyone whispered about, but no one truly believed. The cursed song, the one that had taken her and countless others, had begun with Samantha. Jenna reached for the record player, her fingers trembling as she lifted the needle. For a moment, everything was still, and then a single note began to play. The melody was familiar. It was the same song, the one that had trapped her, the one that had claimed Lila and so many others. But now, as she listened, she could hear something different, an eerie undertone, a voice hidden beneath the music, distorted and barely audible. The song is not just a curse. It's a trap, a chain that binds us all. The words seemed to fill her mind, as if the song itself was speaking to her. Jenna could feel the darkness creeping in, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she listened, her mind racing as the voice continued. "To stop it, you must sever the chain. Destroy the source. The first note, the last note. Together they are one. The last note, the one that had haunted her thoughts." Jenna realized with a start that the song didn't end with the final note. It began with it. The moment she understood, the room seemed to shift. The walls closed in around her, and the floor beneath her feet began to crack, the building groaning as if it were alive. Jenna's heart pounded in her chest as the darkness surged forward, engulfing her. She could hear the song, louder now, its melody filling her ears like a physical presence, a pressure against her mind. The voice continued to speak, but it was no longer just a whisper. It was a roar, an insistent call to action. To break the cycle, you must destroy the song. You must destroy the source. You cannot escape it. Not until you understand what it truly is. Jenna's eyes snapped open. The walls around her were no longer solid. They were shifting, folding in on themselves, revealing flashes of the past. She saw Samantha Bellows, the first victim, listening to the song. She saw her vanish, her form dissolving into the darkness. And then she saw the others, faces she recognized from the threads, from the rumors, from the dark corners of the internet. All of them had heard the song. All of them had disappeared. She understood now. The song was not just a curse. It was a cycle, a chain that fed on souls. It consumed those who listened to it, and in return, It found new victims, new souls to claim. But Jenna wasn't going to be another victim. She had to break the chain. She had to stop the song, once and for all. With the final piece of the puzzle in place, Jenna reached for the record player once more. Her hand hovered above the needle. She could hear the voice, feel the darkness closing in, but she wasn't afraid. This time, she knew what she had to do. She slammed the needle down onto the record with all her strength. The world around her shattered. The silence was deafening. Jenna opened her eyes. She was no longer in the dark building. She was outside, standing in the middle of the street. The world around her calm and quiet. The song had stopped. The whispers were gone. She had done it. She had broken the cycle. But as Jenna looked around, she realized something was wrong. The streets were empty. The sky was dark, but not in the way it should have been. The lights flickered. The air felt heavy. It was as if the very world itself had shifted, had changed. She had broken the curse, but at what cost? And then she heard it. The faintest sound. A melody, distant and haunting. The song. It was starting again. It was starting again.